Well, a very warm welcome to our next session of the day. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. My name is David Roth from WPP, and it's my pleasure to be moderating this session of our WPP BAV Alibaba 11/11 Global Shopping Festival broadcast. Well, our broadcast is coming live out of our studio in London, and of course the UK this week is hosting the COP26 summit here in Glasgow. And of course, sustainability and purpose is at the top of the global agenda of world leaders today, and most of the world leaders around were in Glasgow over the course of the last few days. I think most of them have gone back home now for the weekend. But obviously our 11/11, by some coincidence, clearly because COP26 was postponed from its original date, but now 11/11 falls right over the COP26 conference, and of course then the strategic question I think emerges for all of us, which is how important is sustainability and purpose to Asia, and in particular in China, and I suppose the implications for that for products, brands, not only over the 11/11 period, clearly, but going forward. And to help us navigate our way through this, we have two experts from our WPP companies. Harry Ramanathan, who is the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer of VMLY&R, and Q Hong, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Burson Cohn Wolfe, BCW, who is in Beijing. Q and Harry, a very warm welcome. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for having us.
Well, this is an amazingly large topic, has very many nuances to it. It's clearly something that is new, but with the lens of COP26, it's worth shining some light on. Maybe we should start by, I suppose, the biggest helicopter question of them all, which is how important is sustainability and purpose? And for the moment, we'll lump them together, but of course they are, fundamentally different things, but interconnected. But how important is sustainability and purpose in Asia and in China? Maybe Q, we can start with you.
I think it's we can say at least it's the most important moment than ever before. For example, the 11/11 this year, in my view, is the first year that we see a lot of green actions. This has never happened before. So particularly, I think several things contribute to this new big trend. One is the pandemic. The COVID-19 makes people care much more about health, safety, and broader issues. And also coincident with the COP26. Very importantly is the national agenda behind, because since last year, very strong government guidance, government agenda from China, like 2030 and 2050. This has been greatly educate the general public and making the whole awareness much more obvious than any time before. So I would say it is important. It could be more important in future, but it is never has been so important than today.
Harry.
David, thank you. Firstly, I think I'm taking the question outside of marketing. I would say the raison d'etre of governments in the emerging world, which includes South Asia, Southeast Asia, parts of Latin America, Africa, etc., is sustainability. Sustainability as defined, and I think there needs to be clarity. We are using the definition as the UN SDGs, which is sustainability is not just about ecological and environmental things. There is also community, social, health, nutritional challenges, etc. So the journey of any nation from the so-called underdeveloped to developing to developed economy is essentially a journey of sustainability. That is the criteria by which they define as a country as being developed is when you have solved for issues like basic healthcare, basic nutrition, access to sort of alleviating hunger and stuff like that. So to me, it is the very reason why governments should exist. That is their core purpose.
I suppose there's one thing governments creating policies of change. It's another thing of it being important to citizens. In the balance of, is this being governmentally pushed or is this being citizen pulled? What's your feeling for where we are at the moment?
I think it is both. I mean, again, if you take large parts, I mean, it's changing slightly in markets like India, but by and large, if you look at elections, how are elections won in the emerging economies? It is based on basically bread and butter issues, which are all sustainable issues. Poverty alleviation, hunger alleviation, access to healthcare, access to now including digital access, and so on and so forth. Right. So it's definitely an agenda that is actually being driven by the people, because the people are demanding that, and increasingly with increasing awareness, thanks to social media, etc. There's a better awareness and expectations of these sustainable, what is defined as sustainable goals as rights of people. And that's definitely, therefore, I think it's not government-led, it's people-led, and governments try to sort of keep up with that demand.
Q, to what extent is the Chinese consumer wanting now to engage with brands and companies that they view as being sustainable?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, maybe the government policies and the guidance, these contribute as a bigger context, help educate and raise the awareness. However, I think the real logic behind is the continuous economic development. So China has been witnessed very fast growth in the past decades. And then you see people's life, different generations from grandfather and grandson, they are totally very different people because they experienced from a relative shortage of materials to a much more options and abundant time before right now. Therefore, the consumers, the individuals, they start to care much more, drive by their own, led by themselves, to the sustainability, to the quality, to a better environment, etc. Particularly the younger generation, and those elite group persons. So they start to pay much more attention on for example, the package, the recycle, reuse, and whether it's help to address the air pollution, whether it's safe materials, etc. All those has been reflected. I mean, as we mentioned very clearly in the recent years, with a very fast.
Now, I suppose it's from a sort of a Western developed position. We've spent many hundreds of years polluting the environment through industrial development. In some of the markets in Asia, the development cycle has only been relatively recent in terms of big industrialization and less rural, more rural, from sort of rural to the cities. Do you think consumers have an appreciation that although the West has spent many years polluting the environment, to put it bluntly, that we all now have a responsibility to take actions that redress the mistakes that the West has made, and that is could potentially be at the detriment to the fast developing markets at the moment?
I think the narrative about how we have to pay for the actions of the West is largely geopolitical in nature and not really consumer oriented. As far as consumers or citizens concerned, they can see evidence of the fact that pollution on ground, whether it's water pollution, air pollution, etc., the source of that is not from the West. The source of this is very much domestic action, whether it be by corporate or the governments or even by local communities. And it has very little to do with the West. So I think the average man on the street doesn't associate the polluted river down in the village with something that UK or America has done 50 years ago. They definitely see that as the responsibility of the factory that's 4 miles down on the river, sending effluents into it without filtration. There's definitely, I don't think the average person does. It's a popular political discourse to sort of blame somebody else and take action. So I think awareness of the problem being caused locally is very high. I am not entirely certain about the awareness and the urgency of the need to therefore take domestic action as well is on that same salience.
Now, sort of words are fine, but where the rubber meets the road is clearly actions. So what actions are you seeing in China, Q, and Hari, across the region that you work in, that brands are actually doing in order to take sustainability seriously?
Using this 11/11 as an example, as I mentioned, this is the first time I saw so many real actions, both from the platform as Alibaba, Alipay, and the suppliers, the brands. For example, we not just as we meant, not just through this 11/11. For example, Starbucks, they launched a very cutting edge and new, they call the greener store lab, which means it's a very fashion offline store that using all the very updated green technologies, all the solutions, etc. And it's a very hot spot, so people love it and people can get a real feeling of it. This obviously come back to contribute to further strengthen the awareness and the value of the brand. And for example, Haier is one of the kind of champion in terms of home appliance, domestic appliance. They have already achieved in their own facilities and industrial park, the so-called carbon neutrality. They achieved it by themselves. So if I saw the statistics from November 1st, in the first hour after this year's 11/11 started, it has been sold like a water saving toilet is more than 25,000 units within the first 1 hour. And this translated into maybe can help saving more than 200 tons water, etc. And also all those green domestic appliances have a much better sales than those have, for example, more energy consuming type of thing. So this has already started to reflect it in the brand's own actions, campaigns, and has been recognized by the consumers. They use their cash to vote.
Well, you can't get a more direct consumer response in the sense of understanding than the cash that they take out of their, in China at least, their virtual wallets and spend. So obviously that is having a big impact. We'll come and talk a little bit more about that later on. Hari, what are you seeing from a sort of a pan-Asia perspective? Similar position, or?
I think I have a less charitable view of it, as it were. I think it is obviously de rigueur and now a must-do. Every company has to posture something about sustainability, as they do about diversity and mental health and various lists of issues that are challenging status quo in different aspects. There are very few companies that do it sincerely and do it because they think it's right. And those are companies, I put them in two buckets of companies. There are companies that are sort of doing this as kind of repentance and penance because they've been part of creating the problem, like plastic waste and lack of recyclable material, single-use plastic, etc. Lots of companies have made billions of dollars encouraging the use of those objects, and so they're taking corrective measures to try and mitigate some of that. That's not wrong, but they are genuine efforts because they do feel that guilt. And then there are other companies which are newer sort of brands that are coming to market, or newer brands that are growing into other markets, and that have decided that let's do it from day one in a sustainable manner. So I'd sort of put it in two buckets. Both of them are genuine, but I would say largely it's just greenwashing and purpose washing that's largely at play. And the reason for that is I'm not entirely convinced, and I know there is a lot of claimed surveys that will tell you the opposite. But even if you take what's happening in COP26, where there are so many electric cars and not enough charging infrastructure, that many of the charging points are now powered by diesel generators. It just blows your mind. So I think there is this lack of thought throughness, and you mentioned the higher appliances being sold on 11/11. I guess the question is, are consumers willing to pay a premium for sustainable products? And I think that still is not. If you're buying a washing machine that's a deal and that happens to use save water, you're not buying it because it's saving water. You're just buying it because it's a great deal on that day.
I mean, I think that's a fantastic question, which deserves a good answer. I'm not certain that all of us are in a position to really understand it, and it's only going to develop over time. But one would suspect that there are, a smaller number of consumers right across the world, and Asia, I suppose, in particular, that will be prepared to pay a significant premium or even a slight premium for an environmentally more efficient product. But one would suspect over time that the manufacturers and the brands will have the capacity to be able to make sustainable products that don't command a price premium, that those products by implication will be as sustainable as they possibly can. Is there any evidence in China, Q, that is happening at the moment, that consumers are prepared to pay a premium, but also just the manufacturing processes and brands are anyway moving to a more sustainable way of manufacturing, which will just impact their entire processes, as opposed to ranges and units that are positioned as green or environmentally less damaging to the environment?
Yeah, I think agree. This is a complicated and interesting question. I think having said that, there's many evidence, a lot of real actions from the brands and also consumer votes by cash. I think I totally agree that consumers will not compromise their top priority on price, on quality, etc., if you can satisfy all these conditions. On top of that, you are still more sustainable and environmental friendly. This would definitely be additional credit. However, on the other hand, we see all these top brands, for example, higher or no matter in which categories, this big trend has made all the brands or manufacturers make their best class of products sustainable, so that you have to satisfy at the same time the very high requirement from the consumers on quality, on price, on design, as well on sustainability. This all happens at the same time. And you couldn't imagine that you provide a very premium product, etc. However, it's not sustainable, or it's just for sustainable purpose. However, it's a very bad design. These things do not happen. Therefore, I think it's a little bit pushing the brands or the manufacturers that you try to reach a higher standard, and if you want to keep your position at the top of the brand pyramid, you just have to do so. And the consumers really, of course, there are different levels and of the buying powers. But in terms of the branding, in terms of the position of the brands, you just have to do so to keep yourself at the top on people's awareness. I think that's the kind of something pushing each other and move things together.
Now, Hari, do you think that we are at some form of inflection point or arriving at one soon, which will redefine what consumerism is in developing markets? That consumerism isn't just about buying lots of products as it has been in other markets around the world, but it is much more a consumerism based on a sustainable future for all of us? Or are we just sort of heading in the same sort of direction as we have done in the past, with I suppose maybe the human desire to acquire things for things' sake?
Sadly, the latter, and that is where it connects back to an earlier question you had asked about the sacrifice that developing consumers are being asked to make vis-a-vis the West. It's not so much in the effects of that. It's when people say that, oh no, you should have a more sustainable consumer lifestyle, so you got to buy lesser smartphones than the average Western consumer did 10 years ago. I think that's when the trade-off is not welcome. I mean, electronics is a great example of. The fact that there's a festival of consumerism which we are celebrating is trying to give it a sustainable lens. So the irony of that is itself quite telling. But I think very importantly, the light at the end of the tunnel, or the silver lining, is that I slowly see sustainability having moved. I think in the initial days it was still being seen as a marketing differentiator, and it's now moved to being a de-rigor in how you do business. So it's much more accountability at a corporate level. There's talks of linking into finance. We're in the very nascent stages of that, but that shift is something that I really appreciate, because what you want to do is really sustainability not be a topic. It should be just the default way that you operate, and it should not be a thing. And I do think even in developed economies where we like to believe that the perception is the audience that are called the woke Gen Z or the woke millennials are making more eco-friendly choices, I think that's also more claimed than ever. If you look at, if I asked you a regular cup of tea or a regular cup of coffee, I'm not sure most consumers know, and I'm talking about movements that started way before climate change was fashionable, something called fair trade. I'm not sure anybody insists that only if the coffee is fair trade am I going to drink from this cafe. People don't even know if the coffee being sourced is based on fair trade or not. And fair trade, as you know, is about 30, 40 years old as a movement. But having said that, you see companies like Cadbury's, where I remember fair trade was a big marketing thing. It used to appear on the packs, and today it's disappeared because that's just de facto how Cadbury's operates. And I think that is the heartening news, and I think that's where we all should be heading, where everything is sustainable, so you wouldn't require consumers to make active sacrifices.
Let's just broaden the definition in a sense, and just talk a little bit about purpose, because I know I sort of glibly lump the two together, and they are very different. Hari, what's your view on purpose-led companies in Asia, and is there a different Asia lens to look through what purpose is?
David, yes. So two things. One is I always like to tell clients, purpose can't be manufactured in a workshop. So if you and that's a favorite activity, right? So if you didn't have it somewhere in the founding of the company, and lots of them do, and there's especially in Asia, I can talk to it, which is while obviously monetary and financial benefit was a goal, many of the founders were trying to fill, especially of the big conglomerates, were trying to fill a domestic need for a certain thing, and build that and take those countries on that journey of from developing or underdeveloped to developed, right? And so there is a strong element of community and social and nationalistic purpose that's built into a large number of these companies. It's just a question of leveraging that. The other thing we always tell clients is, let's distinguish between purpose and cause. Purpose is the reason that you exist, but cause is the manifestation of that purpose, which you adopt and sort of seek to make measurable change in. So that's kind of the framework that we take people on. So I would say a lot of Asian companies are purpose focused. They may have lost their focus on it after the second, third generation, but they're going back and regaining it. But the thing is to now take purpose from something that's in the corporate world to actually manifesting in causes that you're going to make a difference in and measurable difference in.
And Q, how would you define for us all what purpose means in a China context, and the sort of activities in China from Chinese big corporates to small to medium-sized enterprises in terms of what activity they do that would be loosely umbrellaed under a company with a purpose?
In my view, probably my personal view, I have to say purpose, this English word, does not make very clear sense in Chinese language context. Actually, I asked this question to my colleagues, and I got a very different answers. So that's an interesting part. We understand that like social purpose, etc. However, if come to China market and within this very unique language system, very seldom people use the purpose. And I think that will be a sort of a communication challenge if we use the word directly. So it could be interpreted into maybe brand value, or for founders, or maybe for these C-level leaders of the companies, they may interpret into their vision or their value, etc. So I mean, there could be very different and consistent interpretation of the word itself. So when, as all for branding purpose or for communication purpose, sustainability is definitely a more common and understandable word in China, and maybe the value is something will be better understood compared with purpose.
If you define purpose, I'd be very interested to come up with a Chinese word for purpose, because I mean, maybe that would help everybody understand a little bit better. But if you loosely said that purpose was something that a company does, which is over and above just making profits, and when I say just making profits, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, because profits are an integral part of being in business. Without profit, you don't have a business. But if you defined it in that sort of way, are there many things that, frankly, Chinese companies do automatically that fulfill that criteria anyway? I mean, maybe the whole concept of purpose is something that is done in China without even thinking about it.
I think particularly the big corporates, the tier one companies, maybe they use like ESG or CSR, this type of thing, to demonstrate and illustrate their purpose, go beyond the profitability and etc. This definitely is an increasing trend in the past few years, particularly with some new regulatory context in China. For example, the anti-monopoly campaigns and the new ask from both the government and the general public, particularly to those big giants that occupies and can deploy a great deal of social resources. Therefore, where is the next stage business model for them, and how should they develop their own business plan, only focusing on more profitability or something else? This become a big question and very, eye-catching discussion in China, I would say, since maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It's not to say that ESG says that this didn't exist. However, it's getting more and more obvious in recent years. For those startup, I think interesting, maybe for some traditional mid-sized company, they are still pretty much focusing on the business itself. And those who are more, who pay more attention on purpose, I think on the one end is those big names, big brands, because they have to and they reach to the volume. And on the other hand is many emerging new companies, because the founders of these new companies, younger generation and well-educated and a more global experience. So this purpose-oriented thing start to become something very, very, very natural, born with their own DNA. So I would say maybe these two end within this very huge China market are more purpose-oriented companies.
I think you make a really interesting point, which is sort of, I suppose, a generational point, which is probably more stark in China, given the very different experiences that recent generations have had, whereas I think probably in the West there's been a much more related experience from one generation to the next over the course of the last 60 years or so. One of the things that I think has been exercising the minds of many companies and brands from a sort of a more Western-looking lens is the tone of voice of how you talk to your consumers, your stakeholders in the whole sustainability arena, because you can become very quickly sort of in danger of patronizing consumers, of lecturing consumers, of not bringing consumers with you. Hari, from your experience across Asia, is the tone of voice of sustainable communications or communications about sustainability, is that different around the various different Asian countries that you work in? Or is that sort of not an issue at all?
I think there definitely is the right tone they should have is one of responsibility and them having to do it, because like I said, especially if you're talking about established companies, a large part of it is corrective action for things you've been doing wrong in a certain way. But instead, what happens, the tone that you find most common is actually one of seeking a recognition for having done something noble, which I didn't actually have to do. But look at me, I've been so nice about it and done something good for the world. And then eagerly awaiting the gold star from the consumer. So it's got that.
But in a sense, that is, the bottom line of that is phenomenally patronizing, isn't it?
It is patronizing. But what I would say is they don't lecture consumers. They don't tell consumers what they should be doing. But there is this feeling of here's this excellent product, etc. But look at me, I've now done this in the way I was supposed to do, and please consider me and look at how great I am. So it is definitely patronizing, and it's definitely shows the lack of understanding of the sense of responsibility, that it's not, which goes back to my earlier point, which is they still look at it as an extracurricular activity that you're doing, as opposed to that is the reform that is needed in order for you to be, as a company and a business, to be sustainable and moving forward as well.
Q, from a China perspective, how important is the way in which this is communicated in order to have its greatest impact?
I think the best way of communication in terms of sustainability is try to make it simple, tangible, measurable to the consumers, because as much as the audience and the public understand more and more that sustainability is important, however, most people don't understand the scientific terminologies, and some big brands, you can issue your ESG report, etc., etc. However, they're still very far from people's common life. And according to many research and statistics, consumers tend to pay more attention to those most tangible and visible things. For example, package, whether there's a reuse, recycling materials, etc., and also how to make this relevant to themselves, that making them feel they are doing something that has a very direct contribution and impact on this. I just give two examples to illustrate. There's an emerging domestic coffee brand in China. I love coffee, but I very soon become their fan for, as we discussed, for very good taste, good quantity, good design, and also you could say they design a very creative, you could say a recycle program that is encourage you to collect and reuse their package, etc. And not in a very dry and in a very academic way. However, they create a very kind of funny program, and I collect those packages myself, even though I'm very busy. I look at many younger colleagues that they really participate into it. So this is I think is a very key learning, that to be creative and be human. There's another example. We are talking about 11/11 this year. We could say Alipay. They create, I think, very good platform. They called Ant Forest energy program. Basically, long story short, means you could do a lot of things. You work every day and you buy green products on Ali, and they will all help you to accumulate your points and credits so that you can plant and grow a virtual tree on Alipay. And when you finally grow this tree into a big tree, and Ali will plant a real tree in the real world on behalf of you, something like that. So I think this make the all sustainability communication very live, very common, and easy to be engaged. I think that's my suggestion, if you ask me.
Well, in the few minutes we've got left, there are many brands that from outside of China that have participated in 11/11 for the first time. Many probably watching this program thinking about, well, maybe if we aren't engaged, maybe we should be for 2022. What advice would you give them with regards to sustainability? Is that something that is a platform that they should be actively talking about in terms of their overall product proposition? Or is that something, as Hari said slightly earlier, that now the Chinese consumer just expects that to be the case, as opposed to making it the key element of a communication platform? Maybe Hari, will start with you and then we'll end with
Sure. I think we're at a stage where, again, it largely depends on the product we're talking about and the audience. But if you are talking about an audience that is a product that's aimed at a younger audience, definitely I think purely from a marketing point of view, and I'm going to park my moral thoughts and reservations on it, but from a marketing point of view, it makes a lot of sense to go in with your sustainability credentials in a big way and make that part of the product differentiation and a reason for choice. And is definitely likely to succeed. Again, as Q said, assuming everything else is even stakes, right? So you have a great product with quality and it's desirable in terms of design and appeal, etc. Sustainability gives you that little bit of advantage to added layer of benefit, I would say. We're still in that stage, I'd say, for next year, for certain. But the only caveat I would add is that when you're talking about sustainability, it would help to really talk about the local relevance of that, which means rather than talking about globally, I'm doing this recycling, what is the difference it makes in the Chinese society? And that would make it much more resonant and relevant in terms of that system.
I think that's an extremely important point. Thanks very much, Hari. Q.
Yeah, I totally agree with Hari that try to make your communication, make your point more directly relevant to the individual consumers, and also depending on different industries. So my suggestion would be, if there is something you can make it very clear, for example, on your package, on your labels, etc., try to do so. As much as you couldn't expect that by adding the element of sustainability will definitely help to make things very different. However, nowadays for brands, particularly for those primary brands, this is something indispensable. You just should. Anyway, you should include it, and the consumer expect you to do so. And also, if your products or your industry, for example, electrical vehicle, this is a very hot industry in China, that rely on those technology and try to focusing on explaining your technology, because many consumers, they are not just looking for contributing to sustainability, they also wish themselves to be maybe the first pioneer group to try new things, new technology, which will also help to improve the environment, etc. So all these could be good leverage by engaging the consumers. And then for other product area, try to make your information simple, clear, measurable. I think that's a better way.
Well, this is a topic that is of most importance and deserves a lot of time, but unfortunately we've now run out of our time to discuss this. Clearly, every single person watching this has got their individual role to play in creating a more sustainable future for us, our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. Now is the time to act. Hurry, Q, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. I know it's late in Beijing, it's late in Singapore. It's Friday evening. Much appreciate you staying on in order to have this discussion. I hope you both have a very good weekend, and thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much, David. Pleasure's all ours.
And we'll be back.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. And we'll be back in a few minutes to carry on the theme of sustainability and purpose.